this whole idea of semiotics. And semiotics, we could say, so what's semiotics? The term semiotics itself maybe applies to complex theories, study of signs, and or a kind of array of disciplines that uses signs or tries to interpret signs. I mean, that could be subjects such as logic, linguistics, representational art or design. But we try and, so semiotics is about this idea of looking at things round about us and trying to make meaning and understanding for what's round about us. That meaning and understanding can only really come from your understanding of yourself and your environment and how you kind of connect with the world. Sometimes we'll see semiotic devices like this used in a way that are a bit like those drawings. They may not make perfect sense to us. So, I mean, how would we interpret this sign? We can maybe see that this is a hazard in some way. But what is the hazard? So we're not quite sure. We could see the hazard as being the lamppost leaning slightly. Maybe the lamppost needs replaced. Or maybe the hazard is the fact that this bike has been chained to that lamppost for a long time and may be seen as a security risk or a security threat. It may be the fact that there's a bus stop just 10 metres away and actually people trying to cross the road to stand next to the bus stop. This bike is getting in the way and the local council want the bike removed. The sign is actually used by London Transport, but unless we know the context of why these signs are put there by London Transport, we can't actually make a definite judgment, or we can't make definite sense of what we're seeing. We can start to guess, we can start to make kind of interpretations, but we can't know what that sign means unless we're kind of working in the context of reading those signs for those situations. So that looks a bit like a road sign, so we're used to seeing something like that, but we're not really sure what that means. I mean, what does it mean? Someone said the other day it's warning flying peas or something. So we have to make kind of sense of things in a way that belong to or pertain to our understanding or the ability for us to construct understandings in the world. Here are two chairs, and it's not a trick question, but which is the most modern chair? Which one would you naturally go towards as being the most modern chair without seeing this as a trick? This one? This one? So, I mean, there might be a kind of slightly inverse psychology going on there. Actually, both chairs are exactly the same date. One has been given a paint job and a new seat cover, and the other one has just been kind of restored to kind of original condition. They're both Chippendale chairs from about 1776 or something like that. So, the way
who painted the Chippendale?
it was in an expensive London boutique. So actually, just by applying maybe a coat of paint and a new bit of fabric to something, we naturally, I think most people would tend to go towards that one as being kind of newer than this one, because this has a kind of a coating or something of maybe something that relates to fashion now. We can see it maybe as being shabby chic or something like that now, whereas this is original. But in the same light, I mean, you get perfect reproductions of these Chippendales that are made today. That would be the new chair, and that would be the old chair. So we're kind of constructing meanings from our own experiences and understanding of the world. And here's a chair that's. What's your kind of reaction to this thing? How would you describe that? Does that look modern, or does it look old? Does it look futuristic? Does it look futuristic? Yeah, modern. It's not a very nice looking thing, is it? But it's an unusual thing, and it looks like it's kind of forward-thinking, progressive. That chair is about 100 years old, and it was designed by Gropius from the Bauhaus. So the chair itself is an old, in our term, in our life terms, it's quite old to us. But what he was trying to imply in the design of the chair was kind of thinking ahead. So he was trying to work with aesthetics in a way that weren't representational of his, normal So our look at semiotics, when we're talking about signs and understanding signs, the signs can either come from a very obvious end of the spectrum, or they can come from a very subtle end of the spectrum. Help prevent a tragedy. If you see children or adults inside or attempting to enter the substation, please call this number or the local police immediately. SSE, power distribution. Set in Comic Sans. Very, a very serious message set in a very jokey typeface. So what is this supposed to tell us? Even at this kind of tiny level of detail, we're reading things into the form, the shape, the appearance. So in a way, we're kind of constantly reading. And in this case, we're reading the form before we're reading the text. So we're kind of making judgments all the time about everything we see around about us. We're trying to make sense of things all the time. But here's the technical bit. Two important kind of thinkers about concepts of semiotics. We'll talk about in these two diagrams. The first use of the word semiotics actually doesn't come from understanding kind of philosophy in a way, or it doesn't come from understanding signs or aesthetics. It actually came from someone called Henry Stubb, who was a physician, and his first kind of use of the term as a doctor, physician, if you like. And the word semiotics was used from the Greek, I think, panos, and panos may be able to correct us, semiotikos, which means reader of signs, interpreter of signs, or thereabouts. My Greek isn't too good, but thereabouts. So the word semiotics was first kind of bandied about by Henry Stubbs in terms of reading the signs of illness and then answering those signs by using medication to try and correct the signs. So they were looking for signs in patients, and doctors still do this. They kind of diagnose through sets of signs. They look for predictable signs in patients before they prescribe medicine. The way that we understand semiotics and how it was developed slightly later may come from John Locke. And in an essay concerning human understanding in 1690, he kind of made indication to this theme of the doctrine of signs. And he was talking about signs as in kind of things that we interpret. So not just in a kind of the sense of a medical sense, or in the sense of the physician, but in the sense of a kind of philosophy and writing. So these two sets of diagrams here. The one on the left is from Ferdinand de Saussure, and the one on the right is from Charles Saunders Peirce. So when we talk about semiotics today, you'll probably find references to these two people. One was a linguist, philosopher, one was a logician and philosopher. And really, Saussure's explanation is quite a clean explanation of how we make understandings from these things in the world. Ferdinand de Saussure said that we have signifiers. There are signifiers there in the world. So whether it's a table, a chair, whether it's a piece of writing, whatever it is, there's things that have the power to connect to this, what he calls a sign. There are signifiers. There is also the signified. So those things are scribed within those signifiers. So if you like, the chair, the Walter Gropius chair, okay, that's the signifier. What might be ascribed in that chair is that kind of feeling of modernity within the chair. This then becomes a sign only when we connect and make meaning from what we're seeing. So if you think back to the green dot underneath the hazard sign by the bicycle, we don't actually know, that doesn't become a sign for us because we don't know what it means. It doesn't mean anything to us. It becomes a symbol, it becomes something, it represents something, but to us it doesn't become a sign, or to de Saussure it doesn't become a sign. Charles Saunders Peirce's version of all this, sorry about this, was something similar, but he focused on this idea of context as well. So he talks about the sign, the object, the interpreter, and the object being context there in the real world. So he's saying that these things exist out there in the real world. The sign becomes, a bit like de Saussure, the sign becomes something in our own minds. And in our own minds, we hold sign that represents this thing in the real world, and this sign, this concept we have, or ability to construct concepts in our mind, is what Saunders Peirce called the interpretant. So the interpretant isn't the person, the interpretant is the concept in the mind that's making sense of that thing in the real world. An example could be, and I can't actually see them, so that's quite bad in a way. An example could be, if you look at a door and look for the little fire escape man that's running through the door, you don't actually see anyone running through that door. You may have no experience of running through that door in terms of there being a fire, but you have a concept in your mind of what you may need to do in terms of a fire to run through that door. And I won't actually go into criticising the drawing of the symbol in itself, because there are all sorts of things I could say about that that are completely wrong. But that's an example of us using an interpreter. We've got a concept in our mind of what we need to make sense of in order to, or how we make sense of these signs that we see. Okay. So, possibly a way to test these ideas is that next time you're out in the street, or next time you take a photograph, don't take maybe just for granted the thing that you had an initial focus on. This was a, it sounds a bit sad, but I wanted to take a picture of this really bad lettering. So I could say to students, don't ever do something like this. Typography, that's really, really horrible lettering. But what I thought was quite interesting, when I downloaded the photo from my mobile phone and looked at it on the computer, I started reading lots of other things into the sign. The sign being the image. And then I was finding signs within the sign. It was 2 o'clock on the clock there, but actually when I took the photo, it was 10 o'clock in the morning. So actually that's misleading. It's not a kind of good representation of the time. It's wet, it looks cold and damp and miserable. Actually, it was quite a warm early spring morning. And you can just see some little buds and things appearing on the tree in the window there, which kind of confirms the reflection of the tree in the window, which confirms that. Also, it was quite interesting that there's something about maybe relationships. We've got 2 very happy young ladies there, kind of walking along hand in hand, so we can interpret that maybe they're a couple, maybe they're just good friends, but maybe they're a couple. So we can kind of read things into this. This man, I thought, looked a bit like a lecturer on his way to a lecture who had so much on his mind. He looked very kind of serious, and maybe he looked a bit miserable because he'd maybe gone to the bar and then had to go next door to the co-op to buy a kind of a coffee because he couldn't get an alcoholic drink from the bar that he thought was open. So there's all sorts of things that you can begin to read into, and actually everything that we look at, even the person sitting next to you, even me standing here, heading towards my middle age and my sensible shoes and my V-neck jumper and things, there's all sorts of things that we can read into the things round about us. So everything has potential to be a sign. And I think as students of fine art, students of graphic design, students of design for digital media, if you're involved in the visual kind of disciplines, that's something you need to kind of open up to and be aware of. So maybe actually reading something about Disses or reading something about Peirce is an important thing to do, to try and make sense of how you understand the world round about you in visual terms. The end.
Do you want questions, Mike?
Yeah, if anyone likes to ask any questions, I'll take